want to make it clear. I make this video with all the love in my heart, Mr. Progressive Politics, okay? But basically,
her position
in your video here, criticizing Amy Klobuchar, who is a huge turd, you say so many things that are wrong that, like, hurt my brain. And they hurt it a lot. The reason why people love people like Bernie Sanders is because he's able to, like, simplify things in a way where they're still fundamentally accurate. And a lot of your simplifications here are really bad.
Can't project political parties of the past onto political parties today as though they're the same.
It does really annoy me when conservatives are like, I'm the party of Lincoln. And it's like, dude, that's like 100 fucking years ago. Well, like, what we should really look at here is why do, you know, the racist people back the Republican Party? Like, come on now. Let's look at individual policies and make decisions. This is a great point. Or even
comparable for that matter. Just because they have the same name. Republicans' activism is to progress society towards a better future. Clear and understandable. All progress has been made by no matter which part of history you look at.
Boy.
The civil rights movement was incredibly progressive. The New Deal was incredibly progressive. Ending slavery was incredibly progressive. And let me be clear about that.
Sort of.
That last one. Lincoln.
Based off the definition you gave, yes, those things are progressive because they work towards a goal. You haven't laid out a foundation for what defines progress, right? Like, maybe you think, like, more choice and more freedom is bad, at which point that wouldn't be progressive. But, no, I grant you your point. I know where you're getting at.
Was a progressive.
Most people would kind
even
of
though he was a Republican. The last thing Lincoln wanted was the status quo. He wanted to change everything. The position you take.
It seems like a somewhat accurate assessment. Admittedly, very simple.
Is whether or not today looks good enough, and if progress is no longer needed. As if, like, should we just maintain what we have today at, like, we built this with
the Green New Deal, with Medicare for All, these issues polling so well with.
Okay, so here's the thing.
Take a look at the video and
we'll talk about it. Your criticism of her here is crazy.
Let's listen to what she says. They really like that you were a more moderate candidate compared to the other ones. But with the Green New Deal, with Medicare for All, these issues polling so well with the Democratic constituency, how do you plan on overcoming that and winning this primary?
Okay, so I consider myself a progressive in one important way. I like to make progress. I am the candidate.
So this is the thing, like you literally said, right? She likes to make progress.
You'll see on that debate stage that has passed over 100 bills as.
And what she's going to say here is that when she works with Republicans, it's for things that work towards, like, her progressive values. Now, is she being honest there? Probably not. I'm sure she seems like she's pretty much a fucking turd, okay? So I'm sure she's lying here. Which you could call her out on a lie, or whatever you want to do here. Like her nonsense about, well, I don't want to pay for rich kids to go to college. Like, her going on that line. It's like, dude, if rich kids want to go to public school with all the fucking peasants, like, that's probably good for them, you know? Realistically, rich people aren't gonna send their kids there, but whatever. Different conversation. But her point that she's going to make here is that she'll work with Republicans and work with whoever she can to accomplish things that are goals she has.
As the lead Democrat in just the last few years,
which is fine.
34 since Donald Trump has been president. And I've done that by looking for common ground where I can on things like drug shortages, and then standing my ground where I should.
Like drug shortages. See, that's a pretty good thing, right? Like, more people should have access to the drugs they need, right? If there was an insulin shortage in a given state, if someone proposed a bill who was Republican who wanted to improve access through whatever means, and that seemed like it was a good way to get more people insulin, why wouldn't you do it, right?
And so I do believe I may be more moderate
stand her ground. She'd stand her ground on the things that mattered. It's pretty straightforward.
Than some of the people running for office, but I am betting that people don't want the loudest voice anymore. They've had that right now. That's the guy in the White House. That they want someone who's.
It's like, oh, let's return to the Obama status quo shit. Oh man, you make me want to kill myself. But whatever.
And tell them that no, we're not going to erase rich kids.
So there's plenty of bad things here to harp on, but to harp on her saying that she'd work with Republicans.
And that we will do no harm to people who want to keep their own current insurance, because under
this
our entire healthcare.
Yeah, we got it.
Say that. That's fine. People can call me willing to speak.
Plans proposed by progressive candidates, and let's focus on the heart of Klobuchar's response. Like, I can make 50 videos about what she said about each individual plan and explain why she's being incredibly hacky and disingenuous. But let's just focus on.
And focus on, like, those 50 other videos. You should make those, because those are very easy to debunk. They're useful. They're good to make.
On the core of her response.
This take is going to be ridiculous, man.
Said, quote, I think what's bold is actually getting something done for the people of this country. And then she later says, quote, I think that a moderate tone is someone who's willing to speak honestly. Excuse me, I misread that. I think that a moderate tone and someone who's willing to speak honestly is exactly what this country wants right now. So she calls herself a progressive because she likes progress. But she views that being moderate is the only way to progress. Her view is that compromise between conservatism and progressivism is the only way to progressivism.
No, that is not remotely what she said. What she said was, I am progressive in the sense that I want to progress towards my goals. The exact definition you laid out before. What she said is, when those goals align with Republicans, I will work with Republicans in order to achieve those goals. Like, this isn't unusual, right? So look at this, right? AOC was excited to work with Ted Cruz. They wanted to work on a bill to stop people from lobbying after they leave Congress. She's like, I want a straight bill, no extra bullshit here, right? And Ted Cruz is like, cool, I'll do it. Where the hell is it? She said, let's make a deal with Ted Cruz on Twitter. If we can create a bill with no partisan snuck-in clauses, no poison pills, etc., just a straight, clean ban on members of Congress becoming paid lobbyists, then I'll co-lead the bill with you. Cruz responded, you're on. Like, should she not be working to make Congress less corrupt just because Ted Cruz agreed with her in this one time? Like, you work with people where you can find common ground. And in this case, the common ground is, like, Ted Cruz coming to a progressive position. It's like, cool, thanks Ted Cruz. I don't know why he's doing it, but whatever. I'm sure he's rich enough with his Goldman Sachs fucking wife, and it probably extraordinary amount of money he has from working in the Senate for all this fucking time. And I think he came for money anyway. But that's besides the point. The point is, like, you have Ted Cruz and AOC working together, probably the most progressive and one of the more conservative members of Congress. Like, it's fine to work with people from the other party. That's not compromise necessarily. It's you working towards mutual goals. Like when Bernie Sanders and Ron Paul would make, like, anti-war bills together. Doesn't mean you're compromising. It means in this one grounds, you found a thing that you agree with, right? I think most people agree that the recent criminal justice reform bill was pretty reasonably good, and that was a Republican and Democratic thing.
Okay, Amy. Okay.
Probably doesn't go far enough as much as you and I would like, but, you know. It's a step in the right direction at the very least.
Name me one time in history where progressives compromise.
Here we're about to wrap it off, rapid fire some dumb shit, and it's gonna make me want to die.
And it led to progress. Name me one time. Civil rights movement?
My God.
I don't think they compromised. Did women get 3/5 votes? No, they didn't compromise either. Did FDR work across the aisle to put in place the most popular government institutions in the history of this country? No. Go ahead, Amy. Name me one policy. Name us one policy that was a compromise. I'll give one to you. The 3/5 compromise was a compromise. That compromise was between progressives and conservatives, and the progressives wanted black people to count as a whole person, and conservatives wanted black people to count as nothing. Do you think the 3/5 compromise was a good idea? On top of that, Klobuchar mentions how she passed 100 bills in the Senate. Here's the issue. Those bills were compromises with conservatives.
Oh boy, I was just fucking the screen this whole time. All right, let's go back.
Name us one policy that was a compromise. I'll give one to you. The 3/5 compromise was
Oh God.
progressivism. Okay, Amy. Okay. Name me one time in history where progressives compromise and it led to progress. Name me one time.
So what you're about to do is name a whole bunch of things that you're gonna overly simplify, but actually were forms of compromise.
Civil rights movement? I don't think they compromised.
I mean, they did, right? So we got rid of slavery, and then black people were in all sorts of disenfranchised positions, and they slowly crept towards having equal rights to people, right? So they worked towards enfranchisement of people, voting rights were increased, certain other rights were increased over time. So it was literally 100 years between the abolition of slavery and the civil rights movement. I'm sure if we went into the specifics, you could find tons of things there where it wasn't like an outright we got everything we wanted in the civil rights movement.
Did women get 3/5 votes? No, they didn't compromise either.
Okay, so that's another stupid thing, right? So you can read about the abolition movement. Where the fuck is it? We're gonna have it. Oh, I went past another thing anyway. But there were tons of different groups of women who wanted suffrage in the United States, and they started at a state-by-state level. That's a form of compromise, right? You didn't say national right to vote or bust, right? It was like an 80 year sequence of events where they worked to get their right to vote. It was a very long time coming for that 19th Amendment. It's ridiculous. To act like there was no compromise and no steadily working towards those goals and making compromises, because even within the suffrage movement there was you can fucking read the Wikipedia page on it yourself, but even within the suffrage movement there's people who disagreed with each other about what they should and shouldn't be doing. It's absurd to paint that as though everyone was on the same page and they didn't compromise, they got everything they wanted. That's not how it was. You can say they worked towards their goals, they worked with each other, but acting like there was no compromise here is just completely
time in
dishonest.
activism compromise.
I shouldn't say dishonest, I should say ahistorical or ignorant, because I don't think you're doing it maliciously or anything, but it's
country wants right now. So she calls herself a progressive because she likes progress. But moderate compromise between conservatism and progressive, only way to... Okay, Amy. Okay. Name me one time in history where progressives compromised and it led to progress. Name me one time. Civil rights movement? I don't think they compromised. Did women get 3/5 votes? No, they didn't compromise either. Did FDR work across the aisle to put in place the most popular government institutions in the history of this country?
That's a terrible example too, because FDR was like a compromise between the socialists who were gaining power throughout the 1930s in the wake of the Great Depression, who were really anti-business, and as part of his New Deal reforms, where it was a compromise between like American like hardcore socialists and the existing conservatives, like business owners, and instead of like abolishing the capitalist class or whatever, they had empowered unions, had minimum wages, standardized work weeks, all of that stuff that we love and enjoy today, that we should have kept fighting for, but we didn't because, you know, America, and we just chose to destroy unions and undo all that great stuff we got in the New Deal. So we could say like how good that stuff was, but like those were compromises. They were compromises by the American socialists, and it was FDR who was making those compromises. I'm sure if you go into the specifics, you can find more times where FDR specifically compromised. It's just kind of like ridiculous to paint it like FDR didn't compromise on anything. It's like, well, yeah, like he didn't really want to do all these like New Deal, like reworking the economy things, but he did them because he was under pressure from the socialists, right? And then he didn't go super far and like fought back against I think it was FDR who had like the military go and run like a salt plant, or it was some type of industry that was on strike, but they needed it for I think a war effort. I can't remember the specifics, but yeah, it wasn't him just solely siding with the socialists, solely siding with this. Like, I mean, you could call FDR like a great centrist or something if you want, but I don't really think that would be an accurate representation of it. But the entire like New Deal proposals were all like compromises that they worked towards. He didn't just go, "You're gonna deal with this, conservatives," and then just like make them deal with it. It's like, yeah, he hurt them and it made them better in the long run. Even if these shitty business owners don't want to acknowledge it, but. At the end of the day, those were all compromises. It's ridiculous to pretend that they weren't.
No. Go ahead, Amy. Name me one policy. Name us one policy that was a compromise.
This is where you trigger me with the 3/5 compromise.
I'll give one to you. The 3/5 compromise was a compromise. That compromise was between progressives and conservatives, and the progressives wanted black people to count as a whole person, and conservatives wanted black people to count as nothing. Do you think the 3/5 compromise was a good?
Okay, that's not why that happened. So it's actually the opposite. So I'll grant you that in this case, progressives and conservatives, the progressives would be the non-slave states, and the conservatives would be the slave states. That seems like how you're interpreting that. It's actually the opposite. So the reason they have the 3/5 compromise is because for determining House apportionment, like how many representatives each state gets in the House of Representatives, it's determined by population. And the free states were saying, we don't want to count your slaves because you're saying they're not people, they're not paying taxes, yada yada yada. Why would we count them as people and give you votes and give you greater apportionment in the House of Representatives if they're not people? They're property to you. Property doesn't get to vote. And the slave states were like, well, no, we want to count our slaves because otherwise we don't get as great of power in the House of Representatives. Which is like literally, you can read this like right here. There's tons of information on this. So it was actually the opposite, but for different reasons. It's not like the slave owners were like, we want our Negroes to count because we love our Negroes. No, it was like, we want them to count because it gives us political power. And like the free states were like the exact opposite. We don't think they should count because I would grant them being more ideologically sound. But it's like the reason they wanted to do it was because they wanted the large states like Virginia, which had 200,000 slaves in like 1776 or whatever, 1788 I think it was, is when that was all ratified. Places like Virginia were 600,000 people, which was either the largest or second largest state, 200,000 of which are slaves. They would lose 1/3 of their apportionment if their slaves didn't count towards their population. So they didn't do that. I mean, there's a more complicated conversation to have about who would have the right to vote back in the day, because like old school, like, or I should say liberals, I don't know, Enlightenment value-minded people didn't actually want everyone to have the right to vote. You can go further into that. It's a whole different conversation. But suffice to say, like, your explanation of why the quote-unquote progressives, who would be the free states in your example, wanted them to have a vote was just like wrong, because it was the slave states who wanted to count for the 3/5 compromise. And the 3/5 was a compromise because, like, okay, we'll give you part of the representation, but not like the full thing. And they're like, okay, that's fair. And like that's how that worked out, because it was a compromise. But it wasn't anything like noble. Like the progressives said, we can't have slaves. And it's like, no, it wasn't really that. It wasn't them saying they need to count as people. It was like literally the exact opposite. So it's just completely wrong to say that. I think that's really it. You don't say anything else too crazy here, man. I mean, at the end of it, like the whole point here is that you just have to be better than them. Like, why am I spending 20 minutes telling a fellow progressive like why he's being like extremely ahistorical and just like wrong about so many things? And, like, I'm sure your heart's in the right spot, man, but come on, passion's there. Love this intro music, dude. This intro music is fantastic.
Amy Klobuchar was recently asked about her position.
I love that. I love the little jazzy thing. Really cool. Okay, it's fantastic. You can make some great content, but like you got to get more like knowledgeable about these things. Like Kyle Quincy's great, right? He has the more like jovial, like dismissive approach you have here, right? I would say Kyle's not as progressive as I'd like him to be, but you'd be hard pressed to find Kyle saying anything, or when I say Kyle, I mean secular talk. You'd be hard pressed to find him saying things that are factually incorrect. He always gets the essence of like the truth there, even if he's kind of simple, like dumbing it down for like an audience. Here, you're not you're like dumbing it down, but you're dumbing it down and just being like outright wrong, right? It would definitely improve your content and just help people actually be informed, because like it's my inner liberal, right? My inner liberal just wants people to have like accurate conversations, and you're killing me here by not doing that.
As a
All right, Godspeed.